The beginning of quiet wisdom. The night was calm in Lowe's Angels. The golden lights of the city shimmered on the glass walls of Sandra Bullock's home. She sat by the window, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The awards, the applause, the fame, everything that once felt like a dream now felt strangely empty. She had spent years chasing success, but somewhere along the way she had lost something deeper: peace. Keanu Reeves had always noticed this silence in her eyes. They had worked together years ago, shared laughs on set, shared quiet talks behind the cameras. But lately, whenever he saw her, her smile didn't reach her eyes. And that bothered him more than he ever admitted. That evening he called her. His voice was calm, gentle as always. "Sandra," he said softly, "you sound tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes." There was a long pause. She looked out at the flickering city lights and whispered, "Maybe I am, Keanu. I've been running for years, but I don't know what for anymore." Keanu didn't rush to answer. He never did. His silence carried more comfort than most people's words. Then he said something that she didn't expect. "Come with me tomorrow morning, just one day. No cameras, no makeup, no red carpets, just life." Sandra hesitated. She had press meetings, schedules, commitments. But something about his voice felt grounding, like a quiet promise that maybe, somewhere outside all this noise, she could find herself again. The next morning, he arrived at her gate in his old black motorcycle jacket, holding 2 helmets. The sun was barely rising, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere quiet," he said, smiling. They rode along the coastal highway, the wind brushing against their faces. For the first time in months, Sandra felt free. She wasn't a celebrity, not a performer, not someone pretending to be okay. She was just a person, breathing, laughing, alive. They stopped by a small diner by the sea. It was an old wooden place with handwritten menus and the smell of fresh coffee. No one there seemed to care who they were. They talked for hours, about childhood, about loss, about the strange loneliness that success sometimes brings. Sandra asked him, "How do you stay so calm, Keanu? How do you stay kind in a world that often isn't?" He looked out toward the waves before replying, "Because I learned something the hard way. Peace doesn't come when life is perfect. It comes when you stop fighting what you can't control." His words stayed with her. They weren't dramatic, but they carried truth, deep truth. After breakfast, they walked down to the beach. Keanu picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. "You see that?" he said. "The stone touches the surface again and again, but it doesn't sink right away. It moves forward because of momentum. That's us. We all hit the surface, pain, heartbreak, loss, but we keep moving. Until one day we rest in peace, and that's okay too." Sandra felt tears building in her eyes. She didn't cry often. She was strong, composed. But something about his quiet strength opened something inside her. "You make it sound so simple," she said softly. "It is simple," Keanu smiled. "It's just not easy." They spent the rest of the day walking through small streets, visiting a local bookstore, watching kids play near the fountain. It felt like a different world, a slower one where kindness mattered more than fame. By evening, when he dropped her back home, she felt different, lighter. He didn't give her a speech or tell her how to live. He just reminded her, through presence, not words, that peace is found in simplicity. Before leaving, Keanu turned to her and said quietly, "You don't have to carry everything alone, Sandra. Sometimes letting go is the strongest thing you can do." She didn't reply. She just watched him ride away, the sound of his motorcycle fading into the night. She stood there for a long time, the cool breeze touching her face, and for the first time in years, she took a deep breath and smiled, not the kind of smile that hides pain, but one that begins healing it. That night, she wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done in years. "Maybe peace doesn't start with changing the world. Maybe it starts with changing how gently we treat ourselves." And without realizing it, that one day, one quiet conversation, one ride by the sea, became the beginning of her transformation. The advice that Keanu gave her that morning would slowly change everything about the way she lived, the way she loved, and the way she saw herself. The silence after the storm, the next few weeks passed quietly for Sandra. She went back to her usual life, interviews, photo shoots, endless scripts, but something inside her had shifted. Keanu's words had rooted deeply in her mind. She began to notice how much she had been doing everything on autopilot, chasing goals without feeling them. One morning, while sitting in her makeup chair before a talk show, she caught her reflection in the mirror and whispered to herself, "You don't have to carry everything alone." She smiled softly. It was the same line Keanu had said, and somehow it made her feel lighter. After the show, she texted him, "You were right about peace." His reply came a few minutes later, "Glad you're finding it." But remember, peace isn't a place, it's practice. His words made her think the whole day. Maybe that was the part she never understood. Peace wasn't something you stumbled upon. It was something you built, little by little, even when everything around you was loud. A few days later, Sandra invited Keanu over for dinner. She wanted to thank him. When he arrived, the house was filled with the smell of fresh pasta and garlic bread. He smiled when he saw her in an apron. "You cook?" he asked. "Not really," she laughed. "I'm learning. I read somewhere that simple things done with care bring calm." He nodded, amused. "That sounds like something I'd say." They ate slowly, talking about small things, old memories from their first movie together, the strange beauty of quiet evenings, the people they had lost along the way. When the conversation turned deeper, Sandra hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you ever feel alone, Keanu?" He didn't look surprised. He just sighed, resting his hands on the table. "Yes," he said honestly. "But I've learned not to see loneliness as a punishment. It's a reminder that you care deeply about connection." She listened carefully, his calm voice steady and real. "Most people run from it," he continued, "but when you sit with it, it starts to teach you who you really are." Sandra looked at him quietly. "You really live what you say, don't you?" He smiled gently. "I try to. Life taught me to." That night after he left, she found herself thinking about her own loneliness, not as something painful, but as something that had always been calling her toward healing. The next morning, she took a walk alone through a nearby park. She noticed the sound of birds, the laughter of children, the simple rhythm of life she had ignored for years. For once, her phone stayed silent in her pocket. But soon, a new challenge appeared. Her agent called with news, her next project had been delayed, and a major brand partnership had pulled out. For years, something like this would have sent her into anxiety. But this time, she remembered Keanu's words. "Peace doesn't come when life is perfect." She took a deep breath and whispered, "It's just a wave, let it pass." Still, not everyone around her understood the change. One of her close friends, Julia, visited her later that week. "You seem distant lately," Julia said. "You're calmer, but it's like you've stopped caring about your career." Sandra smiled faintly. "Maybe I just stopped caring about the wrong things." Julia frowned. "People would kill for your life, Sandra," she nodded softly, "and that's why so many people forget to live it." Later that evening, she shared this moment with Keanu over coffee. He listened quietly before saying, "People fear change because it reminds them of what they're avoiding in themselves, but you can't live for their comfort." His tone was kind but firm, and for the first time, Sandra truly understood the weight of his advice. He wasn't telling her to run from fame, but to see it for what it was, a tool, not her identity. As weeks passed, she began volunteering at a local community center where children from underprivileged families came to learn art. She painted with them, listened to their stories, laughed at their innocence. One of the kids, a little girl named Ella, told her, "You smile like my mom when she stops worrying." That single line broke something inside her and healed her at the same time. It was as if the universe was reminding her that her worth wasn't tied to screens or awards, but to how she touched lives. When Keanu came to see her there one afternoon, he stood quietly at the doorway, watching her laugh with the children. After everyone left, he said softly, "This looks good on you." She smiled. "Peace looks good on everyone, we just forget how to wear it." They both laughed, and in that laughter there was something unspoken, two souls who had faced pain but chose kindness anyway. As the sun began to set, Keanu said something that stayed in her mind long after he left. "Remember, Sandra, every storm passes, but the silence after it, that's where truth lives. Listen to it." She stood there as the last light of evening touched her face, realizing that she wasn't just healing. She was beginning to live differently, to listen to life instead of trying to control it. What she didn't know then was that this peace, this new understanding, would soon be tested in ways she never expected. And the advice Keanu gave her would become the anchor that would hold her steady when everything else started to fall apart. The test of peace the following months felt calm on the surface, but beneath that calm, Sandra's life was about to face one of its hardest turns. Her new film, which she had poured her heart into, was released. She hadn't expected perfection, but she had hoped it would connect with people. Instead, it received mixed reviews. Some critics were harsh, calling it too emotional, too quiet, too different. At first, she didn't react. She tried to remember Keanu's words, "Peace isn't a place, it's practice." But as the noise grew louder online, with strangers judging her work, the old insecurities started to whisper again. One night, she sat alone, scrolling through comments. She told herself not to read them, but she couldn't stop. Each cruel word stung like a small cut. She didn't cry, but she felt her chest grow heavy. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Keanu. Saw the film, it was beautiful. Don't let the noise fool you. She stared at the message for a long time before replying. Thank you, but it hurts, Keanu. I tried to make something honest and people don't seem to care. A few minutes later, his reply came. They do care, they just don't always understand in the moment. Truth takes time to reach hearts. His words gave her comfort, but she still couldn't silence the ache completely. The next day, she decided to take a break and drive to the coast again, the same place where Keanu had taken her months ago. She stood by the sea, watching the waves crash and fade again and again. Keanu joined her later that afternoon. He didn't say much. He simply walked beside her, both of them silent, listening to the ocean. After a while, he said softly, "You remember the stone I skipped across the water?" She nodded. "That's life, Sandra. Even when we think we're sinking, we're still moving. We touch the surface again, then fall, but not because we failed, because that's the rhythm of being human." His voice carried the kind of calm that didn't erase pain, but made it bearable. That evening, they sat by a small campfire near the beach. The orange glow danced on their faces. Sandra stared at the flames and said quietly, "You always seem to have peace, even when things fall apart." Keanu smiled faintly. "I've seen enough loss to know that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's learning to breathe through it." She turned to him. "You've lost so much, and yet you still believe in kindness. How?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Because anger never built anything lasting, only kindness does. Even if people don't return it, it shapes who you become." Those words sank deep into her heart. A few weeks later, she was invited to an award show. She didn't plan to attend, but her team insisted. When she arrived, the flashes from cameras were overwhelming. Every smile felt rehearsed, every compliment hollow. Yet, amid all the noise, she spotted Keanu across the room, standing quietly near the back, away from the spotlight. She made her way toward him. "You always stand in the corners," she said with a small laugh. "Corners are quieter," he replied. "You can see everything from here without losing yourself in it." Later that night, something unexpected happened. One of the presenters made a careless joke about her recent movie, and laughter echoed through the hall. For a moment, her heart sank. She could feel her old fears rising, but then she looked toward Keanu. He didn't look angry or sad. He simply nodded at her, a calm, silent gesture, reminding her of everything he'd ever said. She smiled gently and clapped for the presenter. The crowd didn't expect that. But in that moment, she realized that true strength isn't defending your worth, it's knowing it so deeply that you don't need to fight for it. After the show, Keanu met her outside. "You handled that beautifully," he said softly. She smiled, her eyes reflecting gratitude. "I think I finally understood what you meant by peace being a practice." He nodded. "You did more than understand it, you lived it." As they walked to their cars, a light rain began to fall. Instead of rushing, they stood under it for a while, laughing like children. It felt freeing, like the world was washing away all the noise, leaving behind only truth. But life wasn't done testing her yet. A few days later, she got a call that her mother's health had worsened. Sandra rushed home, leaving everything behind. In the hospital, she sat beside her mother, holding her fragile hand. She whispered, "I'm here, Mom." Those long nights in the hospital brought back every lesson Keanu had ever shared, about patience, acceptance, and love. He visited her there quietly, bringing food, sitting in silence, sometimes reading books aloud when the nights felt too long. "Thank you," she said one evening as he stood to leave. "For what?" he asked. "For reminding me that kindness doesn't always have to speak." He smiled softly. "And yet it always gets heard." Her mother's condition slowly improved, and Sandra found herself feeling more grounded than ever before. She realized something profound. Life doesn't spare anyone from pain, but it gives everyone a choice, to grow bitter or to grow gentle. Keanu had chosen gentleness, and through him, she was learning to do the same. As she sat by her window one night, she wrote again in her journal, "Pain used to scare me. Now I see it as the proof that my heart still cares, and maybe that's where strength truly begins." What she didn't know was that Keanu's next piece of advice, something he would share with her in the coming days, would change her entire perspective on love, loss, and life itself. The lesson of letting go the days after her mother's recovery were peaceful, but Sandra sensed that life was preparing her for something deeper. She had learned to find calm in the middle of noise, but she hadn't yet learned how to let go of what she couldn't control. One Sunday afternoon, she and Keanu met again at a quiet park. He brought two coffees, one black, one with cream. He still remembered how she liked it. They sat on a wooden bench under a tall oak tree. Children were playing nearby, and the soft sound of laughter filled the air. For a while, they didn't speak. The kind of silence they shared was never awkward. It was full, alive, and healing. Finally, Sandra turned to him and said softly, "You know what's strange? I used to think peace meant holding everything together. Now I think maybe it's about knowing what to release." Keanu smiled. "Exactly. You can't fly if you're holding too much." She looked at him curiously. "But what if the thing you're holding is someone you love?" Keanu was quiet for a long time. His eyes softened. "Then you love them by freeing them. Love isn't possession. It's the courage to wish someone well, even if it means they walk away." His words hit something deep inside her. She had been holding on to a quiet pain for years, an old relationship that ended not with anger but with unspoken words. She had carried that silence like a stone in her heart, believing closure would come someday. "You sound like you've lived that," she said. He nodded gently. "I have, and it broke me for a long time. But now I see it didn't end because it failed. It ended because it taught me." She looked away, eyes glistening in the soft light. "How do you do it, Keanu? How do you keep finding meaning in pain?" He chuckled softly. "I don't look for meaning in the pain. I look for meaning in how I heal from it." His words stayed with her long after they parted that day. The next week, Sandra received news that the man she once loved was getting married. Her heart tightened. She hadn't spoken to him in years, but the thought still stirred memories. The laughter, the plans, the promises that never found their ending. That night she called Keanu. Her voice trembled a little. "He's getting married," she said quietly. "I know," he replied softly. "How do you feel?" She paused. "Honestly, I thought I'd feel angry, but I don't. I feel grateful. Like that part of my story finally closed." "That's growth," he said. "That's love without ownership." They spoke for a long time, not about heartbreak, but about acceptance. How every person enters your life to teach you something, and how sometimes the lesson is to let go with grace. The next morning, Sandra went to the same beach they had visited before. The sky was overcast, the waves soft and steady. She picked up a small stone, like the one Keanu once skipped across the water. Holding it tightly, she whispered, "Thank you for what was and for what is no longer mine." Then she threw it into the sea, watching it disappear beneath the ripples. For the first time, she felt light, truly light. A few days later, she visited Keanu at his home. His house was simple, filled with books, quiet light, and a small piano by the window. He was playing softly when she arrived. The tune was slow and melancholic, but peaceful. "That's beautiful," she said, standing behind him. He looked up, smiling. "Music has a way of holding what words can't." They sat together, and she told him about the beach, about how she finally let go. He listened, then said something that would stay in her memory forever. "You know, Sandra, letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to remember differently, not with pain, but with gratitude." She looked at him with quiet admiration. "You make everything sound so gentle." "Because it is," he said. "Life hurts only when we fight its rhythm. Once you start dancing with it, even the sad parts have beauty." For the next few weeks, she began applying that advice in everything. Her work, her relationships, even the way she treated herself. She started saying no when she needed rest. She took long walks without her phone. She smiled at strangers without reason. And slowly, the noise around her faded. Her heart began to match the rhythm of peace. One evening, she invited Keanu to a charity event she was organizing for children who had lost their parents. She wanted to do something meaningful with her fame, to use it not as a shield but as a bridge. As she stood on stage, she shared a short speech. "We can't change every story, but we can change the way we respond to it. I learned that from a friend who taught me that kindness is not a weakness, it's the purest form of strength." She didn't say his name, but everyone could see him smiling quietly in the crowd. After the event, he walked up to her. "You spoke from your heart," he said. "You helped me find it again," she replied softly. They walked together outside under the city lights. The night was still, and something in the air felt peaceful, like life was pausing for them. "Keanu," she said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Sure," he said. "Do you ever regret not choosing an easier life?" He looked at her thoughtfully. "Sometimes, but then I remember peace doesn't live in easy choices. It lives in honest ones." Her eyes softened. "And that's what you've taught me, honesty with yourself. That's where real healing begins." As they stood there, the city lights flickering around them, Sandra realized that her journey wasn't just about peace, it was about transformation. She wasn't the same woman who sat by the window months ago, lost in confusion. Now she stood grounded, with gratitude in her heart and wisdom in her soul. But destiny wasn't done yet. A new twist was coming, something unexpected, something that would test both of them in ways neither could see. And the advice Keanu was about to give her next would become the one that changed her life forever. The storm that returned for a while, everything seemed calm again. Sandra had found balance. Her days were filled with simple joy, morning walks, coffee with neighbors, laughter with children at the community center. Even her work began to feel lighter, more meaningful. She was finally living, not performing. But peace, as she had learned, is not the absence of storms. It is learning how to stand when the wind returns. And soon the wind did. It began with a rumor, a false headline that twisted her words from a recent interview. It spread fast, blogs, social media, television. People who didn't even know her began judging her. Within hours, she became a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. At first, she tried to ignore it. She turned off her phone, brewed tea, and told herself it would pass. But by evening, her publicist called in panic. Sponsors wanted statements, producers were worried. Every time she tried to breathe, someone was pulling her back into the noise she had escaped. Sandra felt her hands tremble as she sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. The same cold emptiness she thought she had left behind started crawling back into her chest. And then her phone buzzed again. It was Keanu. "I saw what's happening. Are you okay?" She hesitated before replying. "No. I thought I could handle things differently now, but it still hurts, Keanu. I feel misunderstood." He called her right away. His voice was calm but full of quiet concern. "Sandra, remember this, people project their pain onto others. It's never really about you," she sighed softly. "But what if the world believes them?" He paused. "Then let them. You don't live for the world, you live for truth. The truth always survives the noise." She closed her eyes, listening to his steady voice. It grounded her just like it always did. That night she couldn't sleep. She went outside, stood on her balcony, and looked at the city lights. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from anger, but from exhaustion. For a moment she whispered to herself, "Maybe peace is harder than I thought." The next morning, Keanu showed up at her door unannounced. He brought breakfast, fresh croissants, and coffee. His presence alone felt like a calm morning after a long, stormy night. "You didn't have to come," she said, forcing a smile. "That's what friends do," he replied simply. "They show up when silence starts to hurt." They sat together in her garden, surrounded by morning light. Birds sang somewhere in the trees, but Sandra's mind was still restless. She looked at him and said softly, "I thought I'd learned how to be peaceful, but now it feels like I'm back where I started." He shook his head gently. "No, you're not back where you started. This time you're aware of what's happening inside you. That's growth. Pain doesn't mean you've failed, it means you're still human." His calm confidence slowly started to reach her. "But how do you stay strong when people attack your truth?" she asked. He looked up at the sunlight filtering through the leaves and said quietly, "By remembering who you are when no one's watching. That's where your real story lives." Those words stayed with her. She repeated them in her mind as she prepared to face the public again. A few days later, she released a short statement. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't angry. It was simple, honest, and kind. "I choose to stay grounded in what I know to be true. I believe in kindness even when the world forgets it." The message went viral. People who once criticized her began to admire her calm. Even strangers wrote messages of support. But for Sandra, the real victory wasn't public approval, it was inner peace. She had faced chaos and chosen grace. Later that evening, she met Keanu again. They went for a walk near the same coastline where their journey began. The air was cool, the waves slow and peaceful. "You were right," she said. "Truth does survive the noise." He smiled quietly. "Truth always does. It just needs someone patient enough to wait." They walked for a while, silent, listening to the sea. Then she turned to him and said something she had never said before. "Keanu, you've been more than a friend, you've been a mirror. Every time I look at you, I see who I want to become." He looked at her with warmth. "You already are that person, Sandra, you just needed to see it." She smiled faintly, tears shining in her eyes. "You think so?" He nodded. "Peace isn't about being unshaken. It's about knowing how to bend without breaking, and that's what you've learned." They sat on a rock overlooking the ocean. The sky began turning gold as the sun set. The moment felt timeless, two souls who had walked through storms and come out softer, not harder. But as the evening light faded, Keanu's tone grew quieter. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said. Sandra turned to him, curious. "What is it?" He hesitated. "It's something I learned long ago but never had the courage to say out loud." She waited patiently. His voice trembled slightly when he finally spoke. "Sometimes the hardest thing about peace is realizing it doesn't last forever. It visits you, teaches you, and leaves you with lessons you carry into the next storm. Sandra looked at him, eyes soft but serious. Why do you say that? He gave a faint smile. Because, Sandra, my next storm is coming, and I need to be honest about it. Her heart tightened. What do you mean? He looked down at his hands, then back at her. I've been dealing with some health issues. Nothing too dramatic yet, but it's getting harder. She froze, the sound of waves fading around her. For a moment, all she could whisper was, "No." He tried to smile, gentle as always. "Don't look at me with sadness. I'm not afraid. I just didn't want to hide it from you." Her eyes filled with tears. "After everything you've taught me about peace, you were carrying this alone." He looked into her eyes. "Because I wanted to teach you how to stand on your own before you'd have to." Her tears fell quietly. She reached for his hand and held it tightly. "You're not alone now," she whispered. He smiled softly. "I know." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving only the sound of waves and the quiet ache of truth between them. That night, when Sandra went home, she wrote one line in her journal. "The teacher is now the one who needs light, and I will be that light." What came next would test everything she had learned about strength, love, and kindness. Keanu's lesson wasn't over. It was just beginning. The light within the darkness. The weeks after Keanu's confession felt heavy for Sandra. She tried to act normal, to stay calm when they spoke, but deep inside she was scared. The man who had taught her peace, strength, and kindness, the one who had carried her through her storms, was now facing his own. He never talked much about the details of his illness. He didn't want sympathy. He lived his days quietly, still riding his motorcycle, still smiling, still helping people whenever he could. But Sandra could see the fatigue behind his gentle eyes. One evening, she visited him at home. The golden light of sunset filled the small room. Keanu was sitting by the window with a book on his lap. He smiled when he saw her. "You came," he said softly. "Of course," she replied, forcing a smile. "You didn't think I'd let you face this alone, did you?" He chuckled. "I knew you'd say that." She sat beside him, watching the fading light. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sandra said quietly, "You always said peace is a practice, but how do you find peace in something like this?" He turned toward her, his voice calm and steady. "By remembering that everything ends, Sandra, even pain, even life. But what we give, our kindness, our love, that never ends. It lives on in the people we've touched." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're not going anywhere," she whispered. He smiled. "Not really. Parts of me will stay in every soul I've met." They sat there in silence as the sky turned darker, stars slowly appearing above the city. Sandra felt the weight of his words sink deep into her heart. In the following weeks, she spent as much time with him as she could. Some days they talked about movies, memories, silly jokes from their early days on set. Other days they just sat quietly, watching the world outside his window. One afternoon while he rested, she found a notebook on his table. It was filled with short reflections, handwritten in his simple, thoughtful style. The last page had a line that made her cry. "If I ever leave before the world is ready, tell them I left with peace because I learned how to live gently." She closed the book and placed it back, tears falling onto her hands. A few weeks later, his health took a sudden turn. Sandra was there at the hospital, holding his hand as machines beeped softly around them. He looked at her weakly and whispered, "Don't cry for me, smile for what we shared." She nodded through her tears, her voice trembling. "You taught me how to live. I'll never forget." His hand tightened around hers one last time, and then with a faint smile he closed his eyes. The room fell silent. Sandra didn't scream or break down. She just sat there holding his hand, feeling both pain and gratitude, two emotions that had learned to coexist. In the days after his passing, tributes poured in from everywhere: fans, co-stars, strangers who had been touched by his kindness. But for Sandra, his legacy wasn't in words or fame. It was in the lessons he left behind. Months later, she decided to honor him in her own way. She started a small foundation in his name, the Gentle Path Initiative, dedicated to teaching children mindfulness, empathy, and peace. At the opening ceremony, she stood before the crowd and said softly, "Keanu taught me that kindness is the only thing we truly leave behind. And if we can teach the next generation to live gently, then he's still here, just in another form." The audience was silent, many with tears in their eyes. That night after everyone left, Sandra stayed alone in the quiet hall. She lit a single candle and whispered, "You're still with me." As the flame flickered, she felt something, an invisible calm, like a familiar presence wrapping around her. She smiled through her tears. Later, she wrote her final journal entry. "He told me peace doesn't last forever, but its lessons do. I see it now. Peace isn't something you find once. It's something you live again and again, through love, through loss, through memory. Keanu's advice didn't just change my life. It became my life. The story that began with his gentle words by the sea ended here, with her heart full, not broken, and her soul touched by the quiet light he had left behind.